Having left May behind, thank God, the Tories are well into their leadership contest, with Boris Johnson leading the polls. Now would seem to be as good a time as any to express my thoughts on the character of the modern Conservative Party. Full disclosure here, I am not a Conservative, and unless the modern Western post-industrial society somehow regresses technologically to the state of the 19th century or earlier, I probably never will be. I'm not a progressive either, as should be apparent from the content of my channel and the stances I've taken up to now. However, I'm very interested in questions of identity and ideology, and I believe that the modern Conservative Party has lost its identity and now can be largely described as espousing a confused and incoherent ideology that, to the extent that it can be grasped, can be described as progressive conservatism. Indeed, David Cameron described himself as a progressive conservative. The combination of progressive ideas and conservatism is not a totally new concept and has swung in and out of fashion several times in the UK's history, just as the combination of liberal ideas with conservatism has. The Thatcher period represented the zenith of English classical liberal conservatism, in which market liberalism was combined with social conservatism, the individual and the family. Conservatism as a strict ideology of its own has long since been replaced by these kind of fusionist movements. Instead of hard traditionalism, conservatism since the 80s at least has been dominated by the neoliberal revival. What many seem to have missed, however, is that outside of perhaps economics, the conservatism of the 2010s has flipped yet again, at least in the UK context. We are no longer in an era even of a liberal conservatism, but a progressive conservatism. And the thing about progressive conservatism is that since progressivism is an ever-evolving beast, it will drag any fusionist faction along with it, leading to incoherence at best, and dissolution at worst. In the 1920s, progressive conservatism, to the extent that that was a label, might well have meant the combination of workerism with social conservatism. But since progressivism itself is no longer reducible to workerism, but in fact to intersectionalism, the progressive conservatism that Cameron and May espoused was itself reducible to intersectional conservatism. A small c conservatism that enacts intersectional policies at a slower rate, while retaining that fuck the poor edge we know and love from Tories. There's no core principle to modern conservatism in the UK. Like what they're offering or not, US Conservatives, even before Trump's more paleocon turn, maintained a distinct identity and oppositional party ideology. Like everything else, this change has occurred rather fast. Theresa May voted against an equalised age of consent for gays and straights and against gay adoption in 2002. Which, agree with these positions or not, accounts for proper social conservatism. In more recent times, however, our late Prime Minister apologised for holding these positions, and promised to root out homophobia in our institutions. May had not moved to some sort of libertarian position in which equality before the law was upheld for all, but skipped from social conservatism straight over it, and into the progressive weeds. Her position was clear.
Homophobia, biphobia and transphobia have still not been defeated, and they must be.
Individual members of the Conservative Party still hold on to social conservatism, but the entire character of the party has changed. It is neither a hard traditionalistic nationalistic party of the distant past, nor a soft libertarian or liberal conservative party of the Thatcherite stripe, but that third type, a progressive conservative party. It began with Cameron, and it has continued through May. Cameron certainly viewed issues from a progressive lens of equality of outcome.
It's not enough, as I've said many times, for a party like the Conservatives just to open the door and say, come on in, if all you see is a sea of white Christian faces. You need to see people from your own communities getting to the top of the army, getting to the top of the legal profession, getting to the top of the business, and yes, getting to the top of the Conservative Party and politics too. So the truth is, if we're going to build that strong, vibrant and inclusive society, we need more role models like this. Many more Muslim men and women at the top of British businesses, many more Muslim soldiers in the highest level of command, and of course more Muslims in our parliament. So there's not just one Muslim in the cabinet and one in the shadow cabinet, but British Muslims all across government in positions of leadership and authority.
It's also rather telling that the Conservatives never saw fit to scrap the Labour Equalities offices. The Conservatives have a Women and Equalities Minister because they've chosen not to get rid of the position in its office. In July of 2017, Justine Greening, who held that position, proposed the Gender Recognition Act, the idea being to remove the need for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria in order to legally transition gender. Even from the standpoint of a progressive conservatism that cautiously implements new social orders, this seems to be a concession to the left-wing flow of culture rather than a carefully studied position. The Conservative manifesto of that very year peddled the progressive narrative on the wage gap and disparate impact in both sexual and racial arenas. Where it was genuinely conservative, it was schizophrenically so, combining anachronisms like fox hunting privileges with ultra-modern gender quotas. Now tell me, what the electoral calculus on this stuff is. The Conservatives have managed to outflank Labour up to now by portraying themselves as strong and stable when it comes to Brexit, which, with the disaster that has been Theresa May, has already been proven false. If the Conservatives have no actual identity and continue to present a strange patchwork agenda that amounts to soft Labour with a big business bias, how will that play out once Brexit is no longer the crutch that it has become? Boris Johnson looks set to be the next PM, at least going by the numbers in the Tory internal elections. Now, is he going to do anything to give his party a real and consistent identity? He's certainly a more politically incorrect character, but the party machine has a way of aligning figures to it. Boris will have a harder line on Brexit than May for sure, but what would he do for the character of the party? The Conservatives need to think about what they want to do for the next 10 years, because this new strategy of hip, woke conservatism isn't working. The party is still, demographically speaking, a party of the old and the well-off, but we shall see whether they adapt or die.